Hello and welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for June 20th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by John Markley, Matt Keyser, and I'm Brian Rexroad, and I haven't been around here for about a month now. It's glad to be back home. And let's go ahead and start with Matt here. And I guess, we've talked about some other types of systems that we really need to be paying attention to from a security standpoint. And Matt, it looks like we're starting to look at some other systems that probably deserve some attention too. Is that right?
That's true. So last week, the FDA came out with a statement recommending that medical devices and the companies that make them take proper steps to assure that those medical devices are safe against cyber attack. It's not too much of a surprise to be hearing about this because for a long time, medical devices have been as computerized as most other computers, and we're talking diagnostic equipment to implants inside of human beings, and they're vulnerable to the same sorts of attacks that we've seen on regular PCs, smartphones, in other words, for years. Infection via malware, on a thumb drive, or attack over a wireless network. They say that they're not aware, the FDA says they're not aware of any particular injuries or deaths related to cyber attack at this time, but the medical industry has significant data saying that they have had malware problems on medical information systems and diagnostic equipment for years. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal mentioning a particular Florida VA hospital in which 104 devices were infected with a configure virus when it was at its peak. So malware and cybersecurity and medical devices, not exactly a new thing, but now it's become much more of an issue now. The FDA is actually stepping forward and recognizing it as such.
Right. I think this is a step in the right direction, although we'd like to, we'd like to have things like this kind of take care of themselves without having the government step in, but this is a case where, certainly we want to be protecting the integrity of people's health. If certain types of systems were to go awry, they could actually have some sort of a health impact on the patients. And so that's one of the things that really makes this an important subject, in my opinion. And it's interesting because this sort of topic has been around for actually some time. I recall a paper that was written by Avi Rubin some time ago. He's a researcher in the security area and has studied a number of topics, but one of his areas that I believe was sort of a passion of his had to do with the medical area. And he started out with a story of, he was visiting, I believe his wife was in the hospital or something for some sort of, routine thing. And he was describing how he just logged into the Wi-Fi network at the hospital. There weren't any controls on it. Was able to sniff around and see, traffic on the network. That was from a confidentiality standpoint, but at the same time would have provided access potentially to diagnostic equipment or even potentially records. So HIPAA, the Health Information Privacy Protection Act, I believe it is, was one sort of early legislation that helps to protect privacy of health information and have some security requirements associated with that. Certainly, it seems that there will be benefits from taking this a few steps further.
And you also have to wonder, I think, too, is that do hospitals and medical facilities, do they consider these devices like they do with a computer, right? Are they patching it? Are they maintaining it? Are they firewalling it? Are they treating it like a computer system? I mean, we see these things become more and more networked, as we become a networking society, network society. So these devices might not necessarily like printers and what was the other one? Overhead projectors. These are things that people don't think about maintaining as a computer system, and then all of a sudden, we have a problem.
Yeah, John, you have a good point. We've talked about that with mobile devices. People have traditionally thought about it as a telephone. Mobile device sort of being the extension of a telephone, and we think about a telephone as a very basic thing. You put the hands up to your ear, you talk into the microphone, and it works. And as the complexity of those devices has increased significantly, just as medical devices have, you start with a stethoscope, and now we've got ultrasound devices and MRIs and such, that they've become much more complicated, but the way the users think about them and the maintainers tend to think about them, perhaps, is it's a tool. And less so thinking of it as a computer. So your point about patching, hiring people, thinking about what the patching processes need to be, and even from the manufacturer's point of view, they tend to think that way. There are new things that they have to learn about to help maintain things in a secure manner. And, certainly doctors, they are overwhelmed with their task of studying medical topics, and you wouldn't really want them to be burdened with having to think about their tools as computer devices. So there really needs to be a good ecosystem put in place to make sure that they're protected and patched properly. And, the model that I would tend to think of is that the provider of those tools has some sense of responsibility for making sure those things stay in a secure state. So, very good topic. Thanks for bringing that, Matt. And I wanted to at least chat briefly about a topic that's relatively current here. There was a report of what was reported as a DNS hijack event, and actually I think they reported more specifically as a possible DNS hijacking. Near as we can tell so far, there has been no malicious intent associated with this. It appeared to have been some sort of a configuration error, some type, perhaps a fat finger of some sort, that caused some domain names to be pointed to basically an erroneous website. So there doesn't appear to be any attempt to steal information or anything of that sort. But the reason I thought this would be worth talking about is that in this particular case, even though it perhaps was a mistake, which perhaps suggests maybe there was a configuration control management problem, but it could have easily have been a security issue. That is one of the, in fact, most of the cases where DNS has been hijacked in the past, it has not been a problem with the protocol of DNS. It has actually most notably been cases where the systems that are providing DNS services have been compromised through some sort of some sort of vulnerability and actually manipulated on the system. So the domain names have been, in a sense, maliciously, but in an authoritative way, changed to an erroneous, pointing to erroneous subdomains or IP addresses, that sort of thing. So this is something that folks want to be paying attention to. That is, whether it's erroneous or a malicious act, you want to make sure that you have a provider to protect you against those types of things. So some of the suggestions that I have here you want to have two-factor authentication. That is, whoever is providing your DNS services, whether you're providing it or others, two-factor authentication or strong authentication is going to help prevent somebody from stealing a password through, some sort of a social engineering attack, and make sure that it stays secure in that sense. But you also want to ask your provider some questions about what security controls, what configuration management controls they have in place to make sure that things are protected well. And then a couple of other measures you might want to think about is keep the TTL, the time to live, for domain names low. That allows you more dynamics. That is, if there is a problem, they'll expire from caching servers that are downstream more quickly. And then last but not least, you might want to have a monitoring program in place. That is to continually check and make sure your domain names are resolving in the way that you expect them to. I don't know, do John or Matt, do you have any other thoughts on this topic?
I was wondering if DNSSEC or similar controls would have helped in this case.
In this particular case, no. Or at least based on what we know about this case. If the system that's providing the authoritative services is changed, whether maliciously or by accident, the signing associated with those domain names would be tied to those domains. So basically, it would be telling you is erroneous information, but with a valid signature.
I'd also be real concerned, I guess, if I was LinkedIn or any of these vendors, is that, I believe they said, this is not a security issue, but, it's one of those things, how do you know? It's like, especially with DNS, I think we're always very concerned about DNS hijacking and DNS attacks, and so it's probably one of the, biggest concerns I would have if I was LinkedIn to say, let's be very, very certain that it is not a security breach.
Absolutely. like I said, all indications so far have been that they understood what the problem was, and there wasn't really any malicious intent behind it. But you're right, John. In some cases, you aren't really sure based on the information that you get about what really took place. There may have been some sort of attempt, and they thwarted it quickly. We don't really know. But in any case, I think the problem's been resolved. There might be a little bit of lingering cache flushing problems that are still being worked out, but I think for the most part it's been corrected.
Okay.
So with that, John, I guess there are always vulnerabilities in software, right? And I guess nobody is the exception here. I guess you have a few to talk about today.
Yeah, sure. And it's near and dear to my heart. I think every time I come on the program, I talk about patching or some kind of a mechanism to keep the devices. And this is exception. Blackberry, which is used to be RIM, but I know they've changed their name officially to Blackberry. It's kind of been on the low end of the radar, right, with regards to intrusions or security vulnerabilities, updates. I mean, they're there, but we've always considered a pretty secure environment, and they still are. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They're doing their best they can, but there have been two recent issues just recently, both impacting BlackBerry devices, in particular the Playbook and the Z10. The first one was really for Adobe Acrobat. Adobe, unfortunately, has been a common topic for these discussions as well, and that we always say keep your Adobe up to date, and this is again not outside that question. In realm of possibility, again, it's Adobe is sometimes the key element here for several of these attacks, phishing and whatnot. So, in the BlackBerry world, it's kind of the same light. Let's keep it keep aware that Flash is included with the BlackBerry operating system, and so just something to be aware of. And it's enabled, so you can enable it, you can install it, but it comes by default.
Right.
The second issue really is the base operating system. It's one of those challenges. How do you say that? If you install a malicious app, so right there you've already crossed that realm of it's that concern is that you've already gone someplace, installed a malicious app. There is a vulnerability in the operating system with the BlackBerry that if you got that maliciously designed app, they can open it up to an attacker. So you've had to have that local attack vector already. The general statement here, I guess, is that the updates are available. If you have a BlackBerry, if you have any device, but if you have a BlackBerry, something that maybe you've not considered lately, is look for an update, especially for the Playbook and the Z10, the Playbook tablet. There are updates, they're available, they're being patched to most consumers and most carriers, and these problems don't have to exist on your device; they can be corrected.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of sort of interesting things here. I think traditionally it's been well known that Steve Jobs has refused to support Flash on iPhone devices. I think to this day, Flash is not supported on Apple devices. And I don't recall specifically what the argument was about there, but it's certainly I think he was concerned about the reliability of the platform or something along those lines. There may be other ulterior motives involved as well. But in any case, the BlackBerry platform has generally been considered sort of the hardened device, and it seems that the market is evolving significantly, and they're trying to expand significantly the flexibility of their devices. So for those that are particularly concerned about the security attributes, they're going to want to make sure they're keeping an eye on how the market's moving and how devices are changing over time and what the philosophy is for the different providers of those devices, making sure they're making the right choice for their needs. So. And
these vendors, they're providing easy ways to update. It's not like it's difficult. Just go in and do an update.
Oh, absolutely. The having patches available and putting them in place absolutely helps the situation. And I was kind of laughing at your point earlier. Once you install a malicious app, I'm imagining a safety briefing that starts out by saying something to the effect of, if you bang your head against the wall, you can expect to be injured.
Yeah.
So with that, John, I guess you have another one that talks a little bit about the convenience trade-offs from security. And
yeah,
I tend to think about the fact that life would be a lot more convenient without any passwords whatsoever.
Yeah, well, and we always laugh is what's the most secure system? One that's not on, turned on, right? So recently, as most people are probably aware that have been following the smartphone world, Apple has announced that they're going to come out with iOS 7 sometime expected this year. Android, I'm sure Google will come out with a new version as well this year, and all these smartphone devices are looking at a convenience factor for the consumer, and so Forbes actually produced a report that they were evaluating the iOS 7 operating system, a pre-release, and they found, or I shouldn't say they found, but a researcher there found that the calculator function, which Apple has moved to the front screen, basically pre-passcode entry, there's a way to manipulate it in such a fashion that you can access some of the phone content. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's a convenience factor in that we want those things, on the phone that I don't have to, slide or enter a code or whatever type of a device you have. You don't necessarily want to do that. You want that convenience of saying, I'm at the grocery store, I want the calculator, or I'm in the dark, I want a flashlight, or I need it, in the case of an extreme case, I have an emergency, I need to make that phone call to 911 or whomever. Mm-hmm. Those are all things that on almost every device lately, especially the newer ones, are coming up before a passcode can be entered, and there are rightful reasons that that's the case. Mm-hmm. However, you have to think in your head, I'm doing something on this machine before the password is entered. Right. And so you've accessed some kind of content, some kind of processing capability, and somebody who may know a little bit more about the mechanics is probably going to think, how do I get around that? How do I get from a calculator in this example to the actual contents of the device? And so it's a convenience factor that we have to consider. There's things like that come into play the same way as I don't want a consumer to have to enter a 12-digit passphrase, right, or a or code, because that's just too much. But you have to balance it out. And so I really think Apple will correct this particular issue, but it's just something I think that as you consider your physical device in the hands of somebody else, what can they do or what could they potentially do? And it's just again something we have to weigh as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Stepping back from this just a little bit here, this is a slippery slope, and it really comes down to, this is my perspective on it, but it really comes down to the balance between simplicity and complexity. That is, when you start out, you want to put everything into a very closed box and make sure that it's well controlled. But what is happening here is, through the virtue of wanting to provide conveniences, some things are being brought to the front, and if you could call emergency calling a convenience in a sense. You could argue it's a safety factor, but more of the conveniences. You mentioned the calculator. You want to be able to do navigation capabilities to at least keep it from the screen from locking. You want to be able to be able to take pictures while the device is locked and things like that. And ultimately, what it comes down to is perhaps the next step in the process here is that you have controls in the configuration of the device in the settings that say, okay, I want these applications exposed, I want these applications not exposed, and then it gets one step further. Okay, if I expose this application, I only want it to be able to access these things when it's exposed, and then when it's not, when I've actually logged in, I want it to be able to get access to these other things. So it becomes more and more complex on managing these things. And the next thing you know, the end user that is not particularly trained in security topics necessarily has become a system administrator. And so we get right back down to a lot of the same old problems that we have with even the older operating systems. And it's managing that balance. And it's really kind of a tricky item to deal with. But in the long run, I'm hoping we're moving in the right direction here.
Yeah, I think it's important to get that right, too. personally, I've had, as the phone becomes more of a general purpose device and not just a phone, like, for example, if I take a flight and I've got the QR code for my flight to check in, and I've got that phone, I got to hand it to the guy at the gate, you know, it has to be locked. I'm not handing my unlocked phone to a stranger, no matter if they are TSA or not. So, and I feel like a lot of people are going to start moving towards these applications as well. So it's got to be done right. It's not impossible, but I can see it would be tricky in some cases.
Yeah, it becomes more and more complex to manage, and it is tricky to make it. And, you know, it's, I think, fortuitous because we are talking about iPhone in this case, or iOS, which has been basically entirely built around the notion of making things simple. And this is where simple and complex really kind of clash with each other. So it'll be interesting how this evolves. I'm looking forward to seeing how they manage this. So with that, you know, Matt, I can't help but try a little pun here. Who doesn't want more cash?
Well, we don't, and I'll tell you why. So a group known as Independent Security Evaluators did a survey of some of the biggest sites on the Internet that were using HTTPS, which is encrypted HTTP, the protocol that most things on the web run on. And what they found is that 70% of the cases, it was a particular security flaw that they were not accounting for. And so it's a little bit of an involved discussion, but I'll try and do a very short version of it for you all. So there's a concept of caching, which is if you go to a website, if you go back to that website, you may not necessarily request all the same parts of the site from the web server again. Caching allows you to store certain parts on your machine, and the next time you load the page, the web browser will say, I've already got this picture, I've already got this script, I don't need to grab it again. So that's caching, hanging on to things that the browser thinks you'll need again. Now, in HTTPS, the theory is that anything that's passing over the connection between yourself and the server is confidential, and therefore you should try to protect it as well as possible, which is why HTTPS is encrypted. And the other thought is that anything passing over HTTPS also should not be cached, because if it is cached, it will be stored in an unencrypted form inside your browser. Now, it seems that the 70% of the sites that this group tested were not properly implementing the don't cache secure content, don't cache HTTPS content. And in fact, they were doing it in an improper way. Now, it's not entirely their fault, and there's a long and storied history as to why, which I won't bore you with. But let's just say that even when there are standards for the web in how to properly implement something, they're a little bit flexible, and not everyone implements them in the same way. So it turns out Internet Explorer allows you to disable that caching in 4 separate ways, whereas Firefox and Chrome, the latest versions, only allow you to turn it off in one particular way. And if you're designing a website with Internet Explorer in mind, you're not covering the other bases for Firefox and Chrome, and that means that certain cases, content will be cached in the clear on your machine. And that includes for certain banking sites, if you've got a picture of one of your checks and that gets cached and sent over HTTPS, it's going to be on your machine in the clear. So all in all, it's a complex situation, but it could be remedied if the people who are running the sites are willing to set the proper headers in order to tell the browsers how to treat the information.
Mm-hmm. Well, sounds like a good thing. So, Matt, do you have any suggestions on how to protect yourself from this type of thing?
I do. So the easiest way that I see, and it might be a little harder for some people to accept, is to browse in private browsing or incognito mode. And these are modes in which nothing is cached. Your browser forgets everything that it sees once you close the browser. Unfortunately, that means that certain features are going to be turned off, like your history, or if you're the kind of person who likes to store their passwords and are safe in the browser, that's not going to be available either. The other option is every time you close your browser, clear your cache. Actually, clear your cache after you're done browsing a sensitive site, like a bank, and that will have the same exact effect. But if you don't take either of these steps, on certain sites, you might be caching sensitive information that you wouldn't want to be stored.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So Matt, I guess the kind of the corollary to this. I mean, what do you think about doing, banking or any of the sensitive information, or web surfing, whatever, on like at hotel or kiosk? I mean, that seems to be take this to the next level, right?
All right. So what's the next level? If you're using Wi-Fi, your own laptop, and I do believe it's a slightly different discussion, but if you're using Wi-Fi on your own laptop, you have this same problem, but less likely that your information is going to be intercepted on the wire. If you're using a kiosk or one of those office PCs that you sometimes see in hotels, you're using the PC itself, and that means anything that gets cached will stay on that PC. I personally recommend you never use a kiosk or any of the PCs that are provided to you in a hotel or other public place, because it may be just that I'm a paranoid security guy, but I don't know who's managing them or what they're up to.
There I make an analogy of a gas station restroom.
Yeah, it's a pretty apt analogy. You don't know who else has been sitting in there.
Right, you just don't know who's been there before and what. If you really need it, that's one thing, but if you have a choice, find someplace else. All right, very good. I thought that was a very good discussion topic, and thanks for bringing that, Matt. With that, let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so. I would describe this as a relatively calm week. We didn't see any real significant events, but there are a few here that I'll share with you. One is this happens to be a measurement of scanned sources on port 53 UDP that's associated with DNS. And, from time to time, we see scanning activity on port 53. I have often, presumed that a lot of this scanning activity is associated with looking for open DNS proxies. This is a particular, or not proxies, but open DNS resolvers that can be used in DNS amplification attacks. And we have seen continually increasing numbers of DNS amplification attacks. In fact, I'll save it for another episode here, but I'll just share with you a little bit. I think on the order of about a year or so ago, in fact, it was actually on June 24th, 2012, that we saw a significant increase in the number of DNS amplification attacks on a daily basis. It went up about tenfold. We saw a day, I guess about a month or so ago, that we detected on the order of about 2,000 attacks in one day. And that basically equates to an attack is associated with basically a different target address. So those aren't necessarily large attacks. They're mostly what I would just call nuisance-type attacks, oftentimes associated with, gaming activities, that sort of thing. But the real significance there is that the frequency of attacks has gone up significantly over the last year or so. So we'll share more specifics about that at a later time. But back to this point, we did see a significant increase in the number of sources that were scanning. So this kind of points to the fact that they're probably using a botnet to do this scanning activity, which further substantiates that it's likely associated with malicious activity. And in this particular case, most of the sources were associated with a particular source or provider in France. A smaller subset, perhaps, about 15% of them associated with sources in China, and then Great Britain and the U.S. followed after that with a small slice of other. So this is basically showing the distribution of sources that were detected in this particular event, where they went from up to on the order of about 1,300 sources scanning at any given time. Next one here, we're looking at scan probes on port 8089 TCP. And I did a little bit of digging around, and there seems to be a fairly strong association with the port 8089 and Splunk management. That is a port associated with managing Splunk. Splunk is a database that's often used for collecting log information for analysis purposes. It can be used for a lot of other things as well. It kind of fits into the category of what I would describe as this, targeting databases. We'll look at it again later on, but as you know, we always see scanning activity is looking for ports that are associated with databases, and it looks like Splunk is getting its time in the light here as well. Now, the scanning activity here, the probes, they started a few days ago, so it's actually up around on June 15th, so it's been about a week or so. It's kind of sporadic in activity. It looks like they're basically scanning across address space. And it's really only a single source that we're seeing doing this scanning activity, and the source was also associated with scanning on port 8081 TCP and previously as well. So I'm guessing a little bit here. It looks like they're perhaps looking for Splunk, but there is a possibility that it's maybe web proxy based or something along those lines as well. Next item is we've reported on many occasions SNMP amplification attacks or SNMP reflection attacks, and this particular case is one where we saw, mostly in these types of attacks, reflection attacks, the objective is to create a large byte volume. In this particular case, what we saw was a significant or more significant anomaly associated with the flows. So that indicates that there were lots of different, there were changes in the source addresses or destination addresses or the ports associated with it that increased the flow count. So this one wasn't particularly large from a byte point of view, or at least not in the measurements that I had, but it certainly did show up as an anomaly from a flows point of view. So this is an attack that spanned across a couple of days here, or basically the course of a day or so. And it appears to have been a target that's associated with some sort of gaming activity. So again, I would put this in the category of perhaps a nuisance-type attack. It was not significantly large, but certainly one that showed up and had some what I would describe as unique characteristics. Okay, next one here is looking at the 10 most probed ports. And as I said earlier, we always have some databases showing up here. 1433 is showing up. We also have the remote access type attacks, port 23, port 22, and port 5900. And we also, as we discussed a little bit earlier, port 53 UDP showing up in there as a target of scanning activity. And there are, as usual, the P2P activity associated with zero access on port 16471 as well as port 16464. Next one here I'm going to just cover just very briefly because there actually isn't very much of interest. Only one different here in terms of most sources probing is that we see port 80 TCP showing up. So that would be suggestive of some sort of botnet activity that's perhaps scanning, looking for web servers. Presumably, when you see that type of activity, it's pretty safe to assume that they're looking for ways in there that that the owners of those web servers did not intend. And next item here is the daily reconnaissance index. Basically, this is just showing that we've seen a relatively soft but continuous decrease in the amount of scanning activity on the network. So that's an encouraging sign, and ignore the little spot here. Actually, our facility got hit by a tornado. So I guess kudos to the operations team that got the system back in operation quickly, but we did lose a little bit of data in that process. And with that, I guess what I'd like to do is just open the floor briefly. Do you have any final comments or concerns that you'd like to share, John or Matt?
Hi, this is John. I guess I'll start. The one thing I was going to mention is that I was at a recent forum, just kind of talking security issues, and the discussion topic got into tabletop exercises, things that we do to stress our incident response or our processes in the case of a major event. Mm-hmm. And the tabletop exercise that was discussed was one where the guys were saying, hey, we're attacking ourselves. We want to see how well we respond. And what they found, it was kind of interesting, is they found that the defenders were well trained. They knew their firewalls, they knew their IDSs, they knew their SIMs, they knew all the tools to detect, prevent, and proactively respond, and even reactively, of course. But the attackers, the team that was charged with the attackers, found that they really couldn't give them as much exercise of those processes as they wanted, and they found themselves, a little bit, I don't want to say in the dark, but a little bbit, challenged in knowing, how do I spark a SQL injection? How do I, do an SNMP or a relay? How do I do these things that, we see as a responder, the attackers actually doing, but to actually generate it, some of those skills have atrophied, I think, in the industry. So it was just kind of a thought that came to mind. Yeah,
actually, I think you have a good point, John, that is in these types of exercises, there really needs to be, a part that's fabricated. One of the problems that I think what you're pointing out here is it's not just atrophy. I think it's a matter of practice. That is, if you're not doing it on a day-to-day basis, if you're not really have malicious intent, it's very difficult to get in that mode, just for a short period of time. And then on top of that, just legal constraints. In a exercise scenario, you don't have the opportunity to go out and illegally create a botnet that's huge to create these kinds of attacks or to abuse other people's systems to facilitate an exercise. It certainly wouldn't be a prudent thing to do. So that puts the attackers sort of in a, they don't have all the tools that a real attacker would have. So you have to really kind of take scenarios and think about how those impairments that the attackers have, these exercise attackers have, would apply, and how you can extend that to the response activities. And it can.
I get to laughing because I'm thinking that I'm going to go to school to learn how to be a malicious actor, right? Maybe that's what we need.
Yeah, actually, I'd say yes. Having come from a previous job where I was a penetration tester, this is exactly some people's job, and there are some people out there who are scary good at it, and we can really be thankful that they're on the right side. But there's definitely ways to get the skills that we're looking for. It just takes a lot of dedication and a lot of hands-on practice. Reading books is not enough. You have to have test beds and platforms that you can set up and just go to town on them. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. There's a skilled aspect to this, and I was merely trying to point out that there are other constraints that exist that you don't really necessarily have the same kind of firepower, and the circumstances are a little bit different. So
that's true.
Good point, absolutely. Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank you for joining us, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach us via email at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. You can find us also on Twitter. Our handle is @ThreatTraq. ThreatTraq video is available from the AT&T Tech channel. It's att.com/ThreatTraq. It's also available on YouTube at the AT&T Tech channel. You can subscribe to the AT&T Tech channel, for example, and get that. It's also available in audio form on iTunes. Thanks again for joining us today. Thank you, John and Matt, for joining. And as always, I appreciate your contributions here. And we'll be back next week for another episode. And until then, keep your network safe.